This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. This episode is brought to you by craftbeer.com, home of the most powerful brewery locator in the universe. Whether you're traveling in a new city or planning your next beercation, head to craftbeer.com and explore the wide world of American craft beer. Want to support small and independent breweries? Look for the Independent Craft Brewer seal when you search. Welcome to the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm your host, co-founder, and editorial director of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, Jamie Bogner. My guest on the podcast today is Andy Miller, co-founder and co-head brewer for Great Notion Brewing here in Portland, Oregon. We are here at HomebrewCon in Portland and made a point of swinging over to the brand new brewery that Great Notion is building up here in the northwest sector of Portland. They made a name for themselves within months of opening. They had a very interesting business strategy, taking over a defunct brew pub on the Alberta Street in Portland and then turning it into maintaining the kitchen and turning the beer program from a rather traditional beer program into one that focuses on really progressive styles. Within a few months of opening the brew pub, they had already been voted one of the best IPAs in Portland. Put them on our radar, and they came out to our Brewers Retreat in Astoria, Oregon, and we've been good friends ever since. We've been so excited to watch the arc and growth for Great Notion. They have recently embarked on this program to open this production brewery with a 30-barrel brew house.
Yeah, it's a little bit bigger than the pub.
It's a little bit bigger than that 7-barrel pub system,
right?
And canning their hazy IPAs and progressively flavored stouts. If you've had any of their beer, you know that they are really known for pushing ingredients to the limit and capturing flavors in beer that we didn't always know were possible. Andy and I are drinking right now from a crowler of Mandela, which if you read Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, you'll know was the top-scoring IPA in our 2017 annual IPA issue. Cheers for that, Andy.
We like to call this one Martha's Mandela because it's the one that the TTB tried to shut us down, and we almost had to dump this batch. Luckily, we were able to save about half of it.
Well, fantastic. I'm glad we get to drink it now. Welcome to the podcast, Andy.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Of course. If you saw the story on Great Notion in the Brewing Industry Guide that we put out, there was a nice case study on how they've grown and how they've used both food and beer and progressive styles to kind of build a business. But it's been a pretty spectacular arc for you guys. Did you ever expect to be now here building a large footprint brewery in an industrial part of town with a 30-barrel brew house? How did that match up to the goals as you guys sat around as home brewers, brewing together in your neighborhood and then and concocting that idea that we should start a brewery?
Yeah, we definitely never expected this. I mean, my whole goal with opening a brewery it first started with James and I. And James Dugan, right? And I just wanted to brew on a commercial system, and we didn't have that luxury.
Yeah.
And it's pretty hard to get hired at a brewery, so instead of trying to get a job, we just decided to start our own brew pub. And we looked around for a while. There was a couple small facilities that we were going to put a little 3-barrel system in. Mm-hmm. It probably would have been disastrous. And then luckily we met Paul, and he's our business guy. We like to call him our hype man. Yeah. And he helped us put it together.
He's the Flavor Flav to your Chuck D's.
He's the Flavor Flav with skills.
Okay.
And yeah, he got us into a brew pub on a busy northeast Alberta street in a really nice neighborhood, and it just kind of went from there.
What I love about that strategy, there's so many folks that you get into let's start a brewery, and they the initial thought is let's build it from the ground up. Let's buy a new system, let's build a new place, and that is that's a very work intensive, very time and labor intensive process to build a brewery from that ground up, especially for folks that don't necessarily have the experience and knowledge, interest. They just haven't worked in that kind of commercial capacity and don't necessarily know what they should know in order to build out a facility like that. Right. But for you guys, you took moved in and found a guy that wanted to get out of the business and it made that entree into brewing that much faster for you all.
And we looked at a couple of buildings, and if we would have gone ahead with doing it that way, I think it would have sunk us. We found out, especially building this place out, that it's just, everyone always says double your budget is what you're going to end up paying. We found that to be very true, and sometimes maybe even triple your initial budget. So I would tell anyone looking to start a brewery, like try to wait. It's worth waiting until someone's going out of business and try to jump in that way. Or contract brewing seems to be a really nice way to get into it now. Or the what do they call it when two breweries are under one roof?
Alternating proprietorship.
Yeah, alternating proprietorship. So we've got a good friend at Ruse Brewing who did that for a while with Culmination, and they're about to open up here in a couple months, or actually a couple weeks. And that was a good way for him to get in and make some money while you're building out a new place.
That's certainly a good point, that maintaining cash flow, and so having money come in rather than just pushing money out is pretty important as you're in a build out phase. If it takes 6 months or 12 months or 18 months, that's a lot of time when you are spending money and you have no revenue coming back in.
And even though we were not making beer for about 5 months after we took over a brew pub in Northeast Portland, we were never closed a day. Yeah. We started one day, it was the Mash Tun, the next day it was Great Notion. Although the sign didn't change or anything like that, we were actually had revenue coming in. So that was a really nice way to go about it.
How do you go and convince people that had gone to this other brew pub before and maybe had a mediocre experience with the beer to then take a risk on you guys?
Yeah, I mean that's a good question. We came in, the place was kind of like a dive brewery. Okay. No disrespect to the previous owner, but that's kind of what they were going for. It was a neighborhood kind of cheaper place. They had $2 Tuesdays where come in, get craft beer for $2, which you can't make a whole lot of money doing that.
No, not on a little
and
$7
so
system.
we came in and slightly started bumping up the prices, and we brought in really good beer, really good other people's beer, and kind of slowly jacked up the prices and worked on the food. And I feel like by the time we had our own beer there, the customer that was coming in day one was no longer coming in anymore, and we kind of had a new wave of customers that knew what we wanted to do and kind of saw the vision of where we wanted to go.
So let's talk a little bit about that vision. I mean, when you all were homebrewers and working on some of the recipes, and some of the recipes that you brew now in a commercial scale got their start as homebrew recipes for you guys. They still are remarkably flavor forward compared to what the beer landscape looked like a couple of years ago when you launched into it. You brew a lot of food inspired beers named things like Double Stack that with a heavy maple syrup component that tastes like a stack of pancakes, or Blueberry Muffin, which not only tastes like blueberry but also the muffin component. How did those beers come about, and what inspired you to make those kind of beers first on a homebrew scale, and then decide there was going to be a commercial market for that?
Right. I mean, we always wanted to approach commercial brewing like we did at home, and we just wanted to have fun with beer. And that's something, you're eating dessert and you're like, could this be a beer? I think this might be a beer. Wouldn't that be fun? Would someone enjoy drinking this and have fun doing it? And that's really how we look at making beer.
Well, so let's talk a little bit about that making process.
Right.
On a homebrew scale, you can do small things, or you can pile a whole bunch of actual muffins into a kettle, or if you want it.
Which we may or may not have done.
But on a commercial scale, those things get a little bit different. How do you achieve those kinds of flavors? And from a brewing perspective, what do you do to make sure that to get the effect from those flavors? Because through that brewing process, with a lot of heating and cooling and everything else, I mean, it's pretty easy to destroy volatile flavors like delicate blueberry, or even a lot of that maple character.
Right. Well, a lot of our beers we start with a base that we've proven works, and so for Blueberry Muffin, it's just a base Berliner that we've gotten to be a little sweeter because we feel like the sweetness brings out the fruit. And then we always kind of had this particular Berliner we made had this.
What are your gravity goals for the Berliner?
Gravity goal, I mean, we're looking for 6%, and we're finishing above 1020, so like 1026, even up to 1030. So keep a little residual sugar in there.
A little residual sugar?
So, and that started out as a beer, Berliner at home that, we were finishing much lower than that, and we were bottle conditioning with Brett, and it kind of had this nice Brett flavor, but we always noticed unless you added the Brett, we were getting this muffin character. So that's, James is good at coming up with ideas, and he's like, why don't we add some blueberries to that and make a blueberry muffin, which was just a little bit mind-blowing at the time. So we did it, and we served that.
Where do you think the muffin component comes from? I mean, my instant thought is like, is this a THP thing?
Yeah,
and,
it probably is.
Okay.
And, it's you got a lot of wheat goes into that recipe, so I think it's partially that. And, it just goes really well with blueberries. And
no, and I mean, I guess that raises that question. People look at THP potentially as a off flavor,
right.
But within the particular gestalt of a specific beer and idea and recipe, it could actually add quite a bit of flavor and component to that. And I have had some other beers like Crooked Stave's Mama Bear's Cherry Pie, that captures some of that pie crust flavor in addition to the pie. And I'm not exactly. I couldn't tell you that it's THP because I haven't run the labs on it, but it does seem to add something enjoyable to that.
Yeah, I've always felt like with the kettle sours, you got to get Brett involved in order to clean it up a little bit, and it's just a beer that we found a way to work with the flavor that we didn't necessarily like in the base beer. To make something new and exciting, and that's really how we've approached making beer altogether. Is instead of saying, "Hey, you can't do that," well, can we figure out a way to work with that and make something beautiful with it? And that's just something James has been really good at, and me and him working together, it's worked out really well for us.
So you did do a batch where you threw a bunch of muffins into
yeah. May or not have done that commercially, but definitely at home that was happening, and it worked out fine.
Yeah.
We did a batch one time, and this doesn't have anything to do with Blueberry Muffin, but we did a beer with Pine State, and threw a bunch of biscuits into the mash, and I thought it was going to be a disaster, but it worked out fine.
Why did you think it was going to be a disaster?
I did the butter.
Yeah,
I was a little worried about the butter.
Okay.
Yeah, and the salt too. That was another thing we tried to think about our salt profile and how much salt we were adding with the biscuits.
So double stack with this kind of maple component, capturing intense maple flavor can be a really hard thing to do in a beer.
Right.
Obviously, the sugar ferments out if there's any yeast left in the beer, and so you're left with some flavor components that are also highly volatile.
Right.
How do you capture that kind of intensity of maple flavor in a big stout like that?
We add it cold side.
Okay.
And we. It's something.
Are you crashing before you do that?
We're crashing, trying to get as much yeast out as we possibly can, and we add it cold side, and we're keeping it cold enough. We keep it cold the whole time, which obviously now that we're making cans is can be a little worrisome. But we carbonate it low enough that we're confident that the amount of sugar we're adding would not be problematic.
Okay. And how so with that, if there is live yeast left in there and there is still sugar to attenuate, are you worried at all about some of those things blowing up eventually?
It's something we've always been told we can't do, and we've done it, and we took crowlers and sat them out and let them sit. I think the beer's got so much alcohol in it, and at that point the yeast is so stressed out. It's just not. It doesn't really want to do anything.
It's a good.
So
point.
we've in all of our tests we've done, we've never had a problem. So, until we have one, we're going to keep making it.
But that is real maple syrup then added in secondary.
Yes.
Really? Well, okay. All those folks out there that thought they've got to be pumping it full of extracts are going to have some second thoughts right now. Same thing with peanut butter. Are you using peanut flour for Peanut Brother, the similar stout?
Yeah, peanut flour works really well in that beer. We've tried a few things, and the flour works really well. Something we did a beer with Microphone, and he used the flour, and it was pretty cool. So we started trying that as well.
What do you typically do? Is that what you use now, or do you use another method on that?
We may or may not use that.
Okay. Now you're sounding like a Belgian brewer. I cannot confirm nor deny. Okay, it's my job to press you on that.
All right.
So, maybe let's switch gears a little bit and talk about hops. In addition to these kinds of flavor-forward, culinary-inspired beers like Double Stack and Blueberry Muffin, you guys have really carved out a notch when it comes to flavorful hoppy beers on the hazy side with kind of a balanced bitterness,
which is something I feel like that was the first thing we were known for. That's my favorite thing that we make, and we were accused of adding fruit and extracts to IPAs early on by commercial brewers here in town, and it was absolutely none of that. It was all hops, and I think a lot of them have come to understand that you can get those sorts of flavors out of hops. So that's something we're very proud of. I mean, it's kind of nice to be accused of adding juice to a hoppy beer when you didn't.
For sure. Now, as a home brewer, like, how do you, was this part of that concept of we want to push hops flavors in a new direction? We are inspired by these hazy brewers in the Northeast. And want to continue. But how do you visualize that? And then how do you go from, hey, we want to make some beers like this, to figuring out how to build a base beer that properly allows, creates a palate for those flavors to float upon.
Right.
And then figure out how these combos and mixes and timing and everything else works to maximize that.
Well, it doesn't happen overnight, just like pretty much everything. And it was something that James and I both were making hoppy beers in every possible way we could try to make them. And one thing I remember being inspired by, which was a brewery, I can't even remember the name of the brewery, and actually probably no one's ever heard of them, but it was a very thick pale beer that just it was not your typical dry beer, and that was something that was inspiring. And then, the hop combinations, I feel like a lot of times we start out with a single hop, and then we'll add another hop, kind of change small increments and see where it goes. And then once you become a commercial brewer, you're brewing all the time, so it's a little easier to figure out what goes well together.
How much do your beers change batch to batch? What and how? You're trying to test some of these parameters as you change them, and
they
and
all
still make
change.
Sure,
I mean, we're not trying to make the exact same beer every time. We feel like if we can make the beer better, there's no reason not to. Just because everyone loved Junior last year doesn't mean we need to make it exactly how we made it last year. If everybody's palates are changing, you look back at a beer like Pliny the Elder, and that was so mind-blowing 5 years ago or however many years ago when we had it for the first time, but it's not necessarily as mind-blowing as it was back then. Not to say it's a bad beer now, but all of our palates have changed and progressed, and so you gotta keep pushing it.
That's a good point. That and it's something that we see. I spend a lot of time with our blind review panel of BJCP judges reviewing beer for the magazine, and I've watched their palates change significantly over the last 5 years, and now I think that change has accelerated even more, where it's not happening over a year or 2 years, but it's happening over 6 months or 3 months, that the number of inputs. And I think that that bear is talking about, that this idea that a beer is a recipe is a little different than the way you seem to approach it, that a beer is what a consumer expects for that beer to be.
Right.
And I have I've talked to plenty of brewers that have very different opinions about this. We brew the same recipe; it's always the same. It's going to be but having said that, there are agricultural changes, there are changes in your malt, there are changes in every raw ingredient that you use, and you're right, that consumer and the way that their expectation plays into that. I often see it online. Well, batch one was better.
Right.
Batch one of this beer was so much better.
Batch one was always better.
Batch one was
because
always
it's not the one you have sitting right in front of you right then.
But I think in some ways they're right, because psychologically speaking, when you had that beer for the first time, it had some sort of effect on you because it was new and because it was different and because it was disruptive from what your expectation was for beers before that. So when you had that beer for the first time, you had an experience that was rather visceral around it. And now that you've had it and had others that are similar to it, and then had other beers that have been inspired by that beer, with other brewers answering some of the questions that beer posed and asked to them, your palate's in a different place. Your psychological assumption about that beer is in a different place. And so, of course, it doesn't feel as revolutionary or different to you now, since your palate itself has changed. As a brewer, what do you do to keep up with that kind of arms race? Because you still want the brands that you make, Juice Junior or Ripe or Mandel or whatever, to hit your consumer in the same kind of way that it hit them in the first time. But what are how do you change that to make sure that they are perceiving it that same kind of way?
Yeah, I mean, for us, I think we've turned up. I mean, James quoted it one time, and I thought it was really nice, is we're still listening to the same song, but we turned up the volume a little bit. Something like that was the quote. I can't remember if that's the exact one. But we have started dry hopping, using more hops. At first we were right around 3 pounds per barrel, and I think now we're closer to 4 on most beers and 5 on a lot of beers. So that's one thing we've done. I think the other thing is just variety. Is it like maybe Juice Junior doesn't change all that much, but maybe we make Juice Invader, which is a cross of Juice Junior and our Space Invader. So basically, you add Galaxy to anything, it makes it better, right?
That's it. That's the secret to a Great Notion beer. Just add Galaxy to anything.
Right. Monkish might be doing that.
They just might. I think Henry pretty much said that they were doing that. And he also told me that he was doing the same thing you're doing, that they're newer batches. They are dry hopping at higher rates, and for that same reason that you just mentioned. When it comes to hops, what are you really excited about?
I mean, I'm still excited about the same hops we've been using for 2 years, and I'm excited that this year we got to pick. Well, it was a group selection, but we got to pick our mosaic and citrus. So every lot is the same, which is cool, because it's a bummer when you're really happy with a lot and then you open a new box and it's just not there. Which we just use it hot side and don't really worry about it too much and use the good stuff for dry hopping. But it's nice to have it consistently good every single time we open a box. But next year we get to select without being in a group, so we get a lot more say of what we're getting. Still
to put that in, for those folks that aren't as familiar with hops contracting, most hops brokers are going to require 1,000 or 1,200 pounds or so of a specific hop in order to allow you to fly out to Yakima and hand select from that, and then they build a pecking order of brewers based on the kind of volume that you order, and you get to select based on where you fall within that kind of range. And so for you band it together with a few other brewers to build that kind of level of volume. But then at the same time, you have a few of you guys in the room all rubbing them. And
what was interesting about it is they put us in 3 or 4 different rooms. Each room has 4 or 5 breweries in it. So we were in there with the new brewery Grains of Wrath, in there with Cloudburst, a couple other places that make great hoppy beers.
Sure.
And we all came to a pretty quick conclusion of which lots we wanted for each one. And then at the end of all that, they send you in another room with every every place for each room, and then whatever you ranked number one, whatever the next room ranked number one, you had to fight over which one you were getting. So at the end of the day, it was like we barely got what we wanted. So this year it'll be a little easier. And then you were
like
asking
single elimination bracket,
right? But the
selection.
second part of it was like we were blindsided by.
Okay.
But and then we're still super excited about Galaxy. We've got a little bit more of that on our contract, so we're able to add that into beers, and we're making beers like Juice Invader and Ripe Invader, which are Juice Junior or Ripe blended with Space Invader.
Okay.
I mean, it's not, we don't actually blend
Space
the beer,
Invader
but we blended the recipes.
Okay. Space Invader is your Galaxy based.
Right.
Right. Hoppy beer brand.
And then, so Citra, Mosaic, Galaxy, we've got some Laurel that we've been pretty excited about. Trying to think what else. Laurel, we got a little Simcoe. The Simcoe this year was great.
Hop, Andy. What are you using
I don't know.
for?
It's pretty nice. We've been adding it in some IPAs. But the Simcoe this year it's like it's back. I feel like Simcoe kind of went away for a few years, and this year it was super fruity and nice. We're really happy with it.
It's an interesting thing that comes with scale, and this is something that we're hearing more brewers talk about. That as the brewery grows, it gives you more clout, more chance, because you're doing a greater volume of business with your vendors. You can ask for more, demand more, get better service, get better quality product. From the small scale brew pub where you're brewing a few hundred barrels a year now to where you're going with this large scale 30 barrel production brew house, that has to afford you a few more luxuries than you had before.
Yeah, definitely. We're it's easier to get things like hops, and then you're able to afford toys, which help make things better. I mean, not better, but you're more consistent.
Yeah.
Like one thing that I really advocated for early on was with our new canning line. I wanted a DO meter, and that's something we couldn't justify at the pub. But we got it here, and we've set up for canning runs, and all of a sudden our first few cans we pull off the run, the DOs are insane, like 200, 300, and we're like, something's wrong, whereas we didn't have a DO meter.
Having said that, like 200 is still within spec for some large-scale commercial breweries.
We try to keep everything under 50.
Okay.
And we'd like to improve on that. I feel like under 50 is a good target for us always.
Yeah.
But, so anyway, what we figured out...
We say dissolved, that's dissolved oxygen.
Yeah, dissolved oxygen. So we take the can, we shake it, and then put it on the C box, which pierces the bottom of it, sends it through this little machine. It tells you how much dissolved oxygen there is. So, our DOs were like 200, 300. So then we figured out, all right, well, as the first canning run, we were all busy trying to figure everything out. We forgot to purge the hose. That was all it was, and so we were able to stop, purge the hose, refill it with beer. We kegged one off to kind of get things going good. Ran it again, and then boom, we're at like 35 DOs.
Nice.
So that's the kind of thing you can get some luxury items, but it makes your beer better in the long run just because you're more consistent with what you're doing.
For sure. So when it comes to that, I mean, we've chatted a little bit about this in the past, but the way that beer is consumed, it really matters, and with how you package it and what your goals are around that kind of thing. With a fresh IPA, your hops, I mean, you want to maintain the absolute lowest DO you can so that those hops don't stale very quickly, that it can withstand packaging for that. If you're serving it out of your brew pub, and you're gonna whatever you brewed last week is gonna be sold by the end of next week,
right?
That's really not a huge concern. It's gonna move fast enough to where you don't really have to worry about that.
Yeah.
But now as you move into more packaging and not just crowlering, because again with crowlers there's still an assumption that drink it fast, drink it fresh. It's an IPA. Don't let it get warm. When you start putting it in cans, then inevitably people are going to start shipping it around the country to their friends, and that does happen to a lot of your beer. And you have to consider that kind of method and way in which people consume your beer. And you have to figure that into some of your production processes.
Right. And it's kind of terrifying,
Yeah.
especially when you see, you look at Instagram and it's something you put out a month and a half ago, and it's, you're seeing people pour it and enjoy it. And you hope that it's the same thing as you sent out the door a month and a half earlier. So that's something we try our best. There's only so much you can do. Beer's it has an expiration date on it. I don't, sometimes it's questionable like what that expiration date is.
Yeah.
And that's something where you hold back beers. We were talking about this earlier, and just holding back beers and then trying them a month later, a month and a half later, 2 months later, and then you can kind of figure out what your shelf life is and where it really starts to fall off.
And you guys are still on the kind of front end of that.
We don't even have. So you were asking earlier if we had any cans from our first couple of runs. We held some back for QC, and then the TTB shut us down, and all of a sudden we weren't canning every week again, and all those cans seem to have disappeared. So I think some of them might have gotten mailed out to people like Craft Beer and Brewing. I don't know if you guys got any, but
Paulie has not sent us any cans,
well, that's
so it's definitely
Paulie.
not me.
Well, we made the beer and put it in cans, and then so Paulie didn't do his job.
All right, fair enough. Tell me a little bit about that. So you guys are in the midst of, you have the full-on production brewery installed in this warehouse. You've
Right.
Been building it out. You've got your fermentation cellar in there. You have various wooden spirits barrels with sour beers and clean beers in here. But as you started, after you got started, the TTB came in and did an inspection and then shut down your brewing here for a little bit.
Right, and it was a pretty bad day. So we had gone to Europe to do the McKellar beer celebration in Copenhagen. We were gone for about 2 weeks, and then we get back, and they had set up a meeting that was supposed to be it was just we're just checking in, we're not going to really check anything. We just want to see your place, nice to meet you kind of thing. And while we were away, the construction company progressed on the work they're doing on our restaurant and tap room, and they blew out a wall like the first day we were back. So 2 days later, the TTB shows up, and we're missing a wall that was on our plan when we applied for the license, which was a big deal apparently. Even though we had a fence with barbed wire on it and a 24-hour security guard and alarm system so no one could walk in the brewery, that apparently wasn't enough. So they immediately shut us down and made us spend $11,000 on a wall that we're going to tear down in about a month or two. So anyway, it was really scary. Luckily, Paul is really good at what he does, and he made some calls and got a wall built super quickly and negotiated getting our license back from the government, and got it really quick. He made some calls to the congressman. I think he talked to Oregon Brewers Guild president, who talked to someone at the Brewers Association, and we got everything we needed within a week. So that was nice.
That's rather impressive.
Right.
So you're back to brewing.
We are back to brewing. We canned 2 batches this week. We're kind of back on. We're brewing 2 days a week, canning 2 days a week right now.
For your releases, you have followed that model of doing organized can releases now once a week.
Right.
But you're brewing pretty big batches of beer if you're brewing them on a 30-barrel system.
Yeah.
And you are publicizing those, and for Saturday mornings and getting lines, and those are selling out in one day of those releases.
Yeah, generally they'll sell out the day of. If we have any left over, we take them over to the pub, and we feel like that's kind of nice for loyal regular customers over there. And I mean, really, that business model, we feel like it's best for us. We make more money every can we sell. We feel like it's better for the customer as well. They get fresher beer. we're terrified of not having complete control over our beer. So if you send something out and then, if it's not tasting how you want it to taste, it's hard not being able to be like, all right, dump that keg. Because if you sell a keg to a bar and you tell them to dump it, they're not going to want to dump it, even if you gave them their money back, or gave them another keg.
Yeah.
So we like having that complete control.
I guess you know for one who it was that bought it from you.
Right.
And you know too that when you sold it to them, it was in the a specific kind of condition. What they then did with it after that, you can't necessarily be responsible.
You know that you've done everything within your control to make it as good as it can possibly be when the customer gets it, and that's something you see. Beer bars all the time, they'll just sit a keg out, not cold, and most of the time that's fine. Sometimes it's not, so I don't know.
Yeah. But having said that, like, you have the ability to make a lot of beer now, and you certainly could probably crank that up, and there are other breweries that brew similar styles to you, like Trillium and Treehouse, that are not just doing 1 or 2 cans per week, but are cranking out 5 or 6 or 8, or producing batches that are as many as 1,200 cases. What are your case releases? Are around what?
It's generally 150, 200 cases per batch. So we're generally releasing 2 different batches per day.
Yeah.
Right.
But then again, like I said, Treehouse can release 1,200 cases of that beer and still sell it. Is there something strategic about the way that you all maintain lower numbers in order to make sure that there's demand for that, or is that really just a function of where you guys are right now in your brewing process?
I think it's probably more of a function of what we've got going on right now, just the amount of tanks we have and everything for the moment. But I think moving forward, I do think that's strategic to not, if your beer's everywhere, then nobody wants to come see you to get it, and we want you to come see us. And so I think moving forward in this place, we can obviously make a lot more beer if we get more tanks. So we don't want to make too much beer to where it's not good anymore. That's one concern of ours. And but I think looking to the future, I think we'll probably open some tap rooms in other cities and maybe us ship the beer ourselves to another place to sell it directly to customers. So that's something we've talked about, and I don't know that. I'm not saying 100% that's going to happen, but that's what we're discussing internally.
Why? Why do it that way?
I mean, for one, we still have complete control over it. We make more for direct sales like that. We make more than we would if we sold it to a distribution company or a tap house. And we enjoy doing it. We enjoy seeing the customer. That's something I kind of miss it here because we're waiting on the tap room to be built out. And it's like I don't have that day-to-day interaction with our customers anymore right now until our restaurant tap room's built. So
what does that interaction look like, and what does it mean to you, and how does that impact the beers that you brew?
Man, tough questions.
That's my job.
I'm kidding. No, I mean, it's just you get to know people, and we're in a fishbowl over there at the pub, so everybody watches what you're doing, which is a little weird at first, but you get used to it, and then you just say what's up, and a lot of times you're going out to get water or something because you're thirsty, and it's like, hey, Ryan, what's up, and they'll tell you what they like or don't like about a particular beer, which sometimes that information's good information, sometimes it's not, but it's kind of nice to have that feedback on a day-to-day basis, and just getting to know people, and you see them around, it feels nice. I don't know.
That has to be an interesting challenge for you. And I mean, a lot of brewers face this kind of thing where you get into it, you're a home brewer, you make beer, you share it directly with your friends, they taste it, they give you their feedback. Most of the time they tell you they love it, and then behind your back they say, I kind of don't, I hated that. No, I'm just kidding. But when as your business is successful and as there's demand for for more of your beer, inevitably you grow, you expand. Now, you're moving from a 7-barrel system where it was you and James, in the brew house brewing most of the beer or all the beer. And now you're in 2 different brew houses. That's the original 7 plus a 30, and you've got a larger staff, and
Right.
you're spending less time on the brew deck, but you're spending a lot more time managing people,
Right.
or managing the processes, or dealing with vendors, or and it's not necessarily the creative part of that business that has to kind of pose a challenge for you, and you still have to really work at remaining in touch with that thing that you had that sparked your interest in this in the first place.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that. I spend a good portion of my day every day is spent buying ingredients and keeping up with inventory and getting new equipment, which some of that's fun, some of it's not.
Yeah.
And I think initially when this facility was dreamed up, James and I were going to float back and forth. We were both going to stay creatively making new beers, and this new facility was going to be a way for us to be more creative. And then, now that it's here, we only have 6 tanks. We can only really brew twice a week here, the way everything's set up. It's like now I'm seeing that it's just the same thing over again. We can stay creative, but we're making beer and it's all selling out, and we don't have the luxury of getting too crazy creatively. So yeah, I definitely look forward to the day where this thing's running smoothly on its own, and we've got some really good people working for us, and I think we're getting close to that. As long as we don't grow too fast again. So I think I'll be able to jump back over to the pub and brew some weird stuff with James again, and that'll be fun. But it's definitely a challenge, like staying doing the actual brewing, and that's what we're in this. We're homebrewers. We were brewing for free, we were brewing for nothing. It wasn't to get cheap beer. It was just because we loved doing it and waking up on a Saturday and heating your water up and getting on the back patio and just hanging out in the summer and drinking beer and making beer. That's why we were doing this.
Is the love still there?
Oh, absolutely. I love my job more than anything. It's great. It's like I feel like a lot of people envy brewers because it's a cool industry, man. People are nice to each other. People help each other out. It's a really cool industry, and I do love it.
Yeah, and there is something about this. I mean, what you all have achieved and the kind of respect that you've built in the industry in a couple of short years, has been pretty intense. But it's also afforded you the ability to connect with similarly creative brewers at your scale and even larger, around the country and even around the world for that matter.
Yeah, as of recently around the world. I mean, there's a group of friends that we have, and we see them at festivals, and I mean, mostly all over the country, but just recently, a lot of the people that were in Copenhagen were also in Greeley, Colorado last weekend for the WorldWorks festival, and then Paulie was in Brooklyn with a bunch of the same people that were in Copenhagen at the other half festival. So it's a pretty cool group of people, man.
How do the beers that your peers brew at those breweries impact the way that you brew and the way that you even think about designing or building beers? You
definitely, I mean, for one, you try different things, and if you like it, you're definitely going to try to brew something similar. I mean, you're not rip it off, but a lot of times it's just a process that someone's doing, and you just want to try a process because it sounds cool. So there's a lot of that. We talk shop and just different things we're doing, and one of the things we've been doing for a while now that just from talking to other brewers we learned about was, and we did it at home some too, is just the whole, I mean, I guess at home it's called the hop stand, where you throw all the hops in at the end, you let it sit. So what we've been doing for quite a while is we'll cool the wort down in the kettle to 160 degrees or so, add an insane amount of Whirlpool hops, and that's the only hops that's going into the kettle at all. There's no first war. There's, no 30-minute edition, no 5-minute edition.
Right.
So, and then we put them in there, do a little whirlpool, and then we send it to the fermenter. So it's and that's just an example of something that someone else was talking about. It's like, man, that's super cool. We got to try that.
It is. You did mention that earlier before the podcast to me, that the way that you manage bitterness now in your hazy IPAs is not through specific bittering charges at, X number of minutes that are going to isomerize over however long. You control bitterness by what temperature you run that hop stand at the in the whirlpool.
Right. Yeah, that's what we've been doing that for a little while. And not all of our beers either.
The higher the temperature, then the more bitterness you get out of that.
The higher the temperature, more bitterness. So, we'll run something we want super soft and like almost no bitterness. We'll cool it down to about 155 degrees. And then we're adding 44 pounds of hops and 30 barrels. Pretty much on everything here. And then, if it's like a double IPA, we want a little more bitterness, maybe we'll hit 170, 175. We even did a beer at 195, which was, it's not that cool compared to boiling, but it does make a little bit of a difference.
We're getting close to the end here, but that crowler of I finished off the Mandela crowler, so you're out of luck, my friend. I did notice in your tap room that there are some spirits barrels full of some of these stouts, like Double Stack and French Toast, and Vanilla Limousine. Yeah. What's the plan for those? Because inquiring beer nerds want to know.
Right. So as soon as next week, we should be racking the Double Stack barrels, getting it in a bright tank, and we're going to put some more coffee on it, because some of it got coffee, some of it didn't, and it's been a while. So we're going to do another little coffee edition, and then carbonate it up, and we'll have a mobile bottler in here at some point. We're waiting on labels right now, but hopefully like within the month we'll have that ready. And we'd have to talk to Paulie about what our goal is, what our game plan is about the sale of that, because I would imagine it could be pretty crazy.
One could imagine. I'd love to can't wait to see the lines for that. Well, cheers. Andy
cheers.
Miller. We didn't get to talk to James Dugan or Polly Ryder, for this one, but they are your two partners in this business of Great Notion, and deserve the credit as such.
Absolutely.
I appreciate you taking the time, talking to me on the podcast, and sharing some of your thoughts about brewing with our audience. Cheers. I'm going to try to drink as much beer as I can right now of yours before I have to
get on the plane.
Hop on a plane back to Colorado. But
thank you for having us, Jamie. We really appreciate what you guys have done for us, and inviting us to Astoria. That was so cool to be able to do that. And thanks, Hayden. And we appreciate the articles in the magazine, man. Thanks a lot.
Hey, it's not a thing. You guys make some fantastic
great magazine. You guys should go get it.
On that note, yes, if you want to subscribe to Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, you can at beerandbrewing.com. Encourage everyone to do that. And as well, if you enjoy the podcast, please subscribe on whatever platform you listen to podcasts on. We'll be back next week with a brand new episode. Cheers.
Cheers.
This episode has been brought to you by craftbeer.com, home of the most mouth-watering map in the world, the map of U.S. breweries. If you find yourself in a new city and want to sample the local flavors, or if you just want to marvel at the vast American beer landscape, visit craftbeer.com. This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com, or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.